Welcome to the Diabetes Podcast, where real stories meet real science, helping you take charge, not just take medicine. Today we're talking about childhood obesity with one of the nation's leading subject matter experts. Dr. Evan Nadler is a pioneer in pediatric obesity care and the country's leading pediatric bariatric surgeon. For more than 20 years, he's treated children and families navigating obesity, led NIH-funded research into the biology of fat cells, and bridged the gap from bench science to bedside care. He's now on a mission to help the more than 100 million people living with obesity through expert care, evidence-based education, and innovative solutions. He's writing a new book, hosts a growing YouTube channel, and has founded a pediatric telemedicine weight management practice to expand access to care nationwide. In this conversation, we get into patient-first language, how the landscape has changed from juvenile versus adult diabetes to type 1, type 2, and beyond, what epigenetics really means in practical terms, why two teens at the same weight can have very different metabolic risks, how families can build an in-home biodome that supports healthier choices, and where policy, access, and stigma fit in. It's a powerful, compassionate, and deeply practical discussion. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
And I'm Amber.
And Amber, today we're talking with Dr. Evan Nadler. Dr. Nadler, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, guys. My pleasure.
Awesome. So good to have you here. And I was hoping that we could jump right in and talk about and really help our listeners understand what the obese pediatric patient today looks like versus maybe 20 or 30 years ago that you come across in your experiences in your practice.
Sure. But first, I need to I don't want to be that guy, but I have to correct you because you shouldn't be calling a patient obese. Shouldn't say obese pediatric patient.
Thank you. I do the same thing with people with diabetes. If somebody
Exactly.
says diabetics, I say people with diabetes. I love this. Thank you.
It is exactly the same thing. And it's called patient first language or people first language. And we should always talk about the child with obesity or the child with type 2 diabetes or the child with
Absolutely
whatever disease, and same for adults. And so
That's not being that guy. That is being a physician and a patient advocate. And it is beautiful. And I thank you for that. Love it. That's a great start.
It's also being that guy a little bit.
No, it isn't.
But anyway, so, I would also say that obviously I'm a childhood obesity expert. And I think people may not even know, depending on the age of most of your listeners, that the childhood obesity epidemic has led to a type 2 diabetes epidemic in children. Mm-hmm. And what used to be, well, it's now called type 2, but it used to be back in the day termed adult onset diabetes. Mm-hmm. And that type 1 diabetes was called childhood or juvenile diabetes. And then those terms had to get changed because more and more younger people were getting diabetes at a younger age, and it became very clear that it had nothing to do with age and much more to do with the mechanism by which the diabetes or the insulin resistance came to be. So in this particular case, it's obesity leading to insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes. But that wasn't your question. The question was, what is the patient?
No, I think that's a really excellent point. And I think that needs to be distinguished because it used to be juvenile versus adult, just like you said. And because of seeing type 2 at earlier ages, which was my question, like how has this landscape changed over time?
Sure.
It was no longer. Now we have type 1, which is autoimmune, type 2, which is more metabolic, could be obesity, weight related for sure, insulin resistant type diabetes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now there are people talking about type 1.5, which mix of both. And then now we have type 3, which people think of Alzheimer's or other related dementias as type 3 diabetes. So it's all.
You have type 3C. It's like
it's all
so
evolving.
Many.
Yeah. And that's something I think people need to also understand is that the science of today is not the science of yesterday, nor is it the science of tomorrow. So when we talk about these things, we talk about them in general as best we understand them currently. And,
Beautiful
things
distinction.
change. But first of all, children with obesity have been around forever, and adults with obesity have also been around forever, just not necessarily in the numbers that we see them today.
Hmm.
If you think about the Rubenesque paintings in the what was that, 15th century, 16th century, sometime around there, those women were all
Renaissance.
the Renaissance period. Yep. I guess I should have said that and not
That's
not
fine.
not uncovered my ignorance of time periods, but or revealed my ignorance of time periods. But anyway, all those women were large, voluptuous women. Buddha has always been depicted as a very large male, so it is unlikely that obesity is solely a product of today. It's been around for quite some time. And the same thing is true with children, although with children, it used to be much more common that we would see children with true sort of syndromic obesity or what's
Hmm.
called monogenic obesity, which basically is a fancy way of saying these kids had genetic diseases that either were associated with obesity or outright caused obesity. Whereas today, there is still a huge genetic component to the disease. It's no longer quite as direct. It's much more of a um, combination of genetic drivers, genetic predisposition, in combination with epigenetics, which we can talk about in more detail, but it's a term
Hmm.
that people throw around. Um, Mostly they throw around because they don't understand it, but
Hmm.
that's also in part because it's not really that well understood. But it's basically how the environment or external influences can change the way genes function.
How
Um,
I like to think of it like the gene is there. It's does the light switch get turned on or not, and the environment is something that could control the hand to turn the light switch on or off.
so again, because I'm going to be that guy, I'm going to change
No,
your
be that
analogy.
guy because Richie is that guy in our usual podcast when I say something that's
Well, no, that
not.
actually I like that analogy, but I would
Mhm.
actually just modify it a little bit and say it's more like a dimmer because it's not an on and off. It's
Love
not a
it.
yes or no. It can be much more graded.
Can we get back? Not to, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no.
Regarding the monogenic obesity and how now it's more environmental factors, processed foods, many things that come into play. When you're talking the numbers with what used to occur with more of the monogenic, I remember learning back in the day of schooling about Prader-Willi syndrome, and I believe that was like 1 in 15,000, and that was one of the more common genetic conditions of obesity. And I think that context matters because you see way more, I would imagine, than 1 in every 15,000 children with obesity that you're coming across.
Oh yeah, I mean the yes. Well, diseases like Prader-Willi, actually it's Prader-Willi. I was at a
Thank you again.
well, that's correcting myself because I was at a patient advocacy meeting with a group of Prader-Willi moms, and they made it clear to me that I was saying it wrong, which I try to be accurate when I can. But and then there's Bartlett-Beetle syndrome, or another people say that syndrome differently as well. And there are known syndromes that are associated with obesity, and the rates of those are about the same as they've always been. They're not necessarily increasing at all. It's just that the rate of what people sometimes call polygenic obesity, um, meaning multiple genes at play with the epigenetic component involved as well, the numbers are crazy. It's 15 million children in the United States with obesity in the year
Yeah.
2025. So that's obviously too many to be just related to genes themselves. But it is still thought that at least 40 to 70% of all obesity risk, and thus all obesity, is what's called heritable, which means it can be passed on from generation to generation. And my guess is that those numbers are actually an underestimate because I think most of those um, numbers and when those sort of studies, like the twin studies that came out that suggested that percentage was heritable, that was before we knew anything about epigenetics. And since epigenetically modified genes can also be passed from generation to generation, I think the likelihood is that the 40 to 70% number is probably an underestimate, especially if you go to younger children. It obviously changes over time. But I was editing or writing my chapter on this sort of topic today. And I was also thinking about the kids who I saw, especially when I first started out, who were, let's say, 18 or 19 and had BMIs in the 70s or 80s. And that also has to be genetic.
I think that bears repeating, because when we talk about the overweight category of BMI, we're looking of above 25, and then obesity, and then because it gets even higher, you've got grade 1, 2, 3. Can you say that BMI again for people who might have missed that? Because that is incredible.
So one of the things, there was a recent manuscript or recent publication that I looked at that actually, so in kids, people make things more difficult than they need to be and talk about percentage of the 95th percentile for age and gender, age and sex at a certain age. And that's how obesity is defined. And then class 1, as you said, and then, class 2 and 3, they talk about 120th percentile of the 95th percentile, which totally makes no sense.
A percent of a percent.
Yeah, or it's 120. Yes. So we're like, yeah. Anyway, but then in this recent manuscript, they talked about class 4 and class 5 obesity in kids because there are so many kids who are like off the charts. So I think the highest BMI I've ever seen in a quote unquote child, and I think it was a 19-year-old, was 90 something. And I've seen more routinely 70s and 80s. And again, to me, it has to be genetic because what's super fascinating, this was one of the stories I was actually writing in my chapter in my hopeful book that'll get out someday, was about a 15-year-old that struck me in my early days because he was walking around at 5,500 pounds without really much metabolic disease going on.
5,000.
500 pounds.
Of course. I'm sorry. I couldn't. My ears were. I thought I heard 5,500, and I'm like, wait, no, what? No.
He's a
Does not
15-year-old
compute.
boy. 15-year-old boy. I'll say 16, so not to confuse you. A 16-year-old boy who weighed about 500 pounds.
Oh my.
And yeah, he wasn't like a healthy rock star, but he also wasn't nearly as sick as I would have anticipated him being. And that was one of the early kids that I saw that really just struck me in terms of how different the disease can be amongst different individuals and why there has to be a much bigger genetic component than people really understand, because most people at 500 pounds would have raging diabetes and on insulin or have, metabolic dysfunction associated liver disease or something else really significant. And truly, this 15-year-old was sort of living his life. He wasn't, it wasn't his best life, but he was going around doing his thing. In fact, I don't think he was on any medication when I first saw him. And yet I saw other 500-pound kids who were sick as all get out. So that really sort of helped me start to think about this disease of obesity slightly differently, because if it were just like a linear weight-related disease, then, the bigger you are, the sicker you would get. And we now know, like I would see patients with type 2 diabetes, kids with type 2 diabetes with a BMI of 40. And then, kids with BMIs of 80 with no insulin resistance or little insulin resistance. So regardless of all of it, there has to be a huge genetic component, because the disease and diabetes and almost every disease affects different people differently. And so why is that? It's because we're all built differently. We're all programmed differently. And um, it's actually one of the reasons why I really try to encourage people not to tell others how their weight loss journey worked or didn't work or whatever, because it's a huge leap to assume that something that worked for you is going to work for somebody else, or vice versa, that if it didn't work for you, that it couldn't work for somebody else. So I try to keep, not to mention people don't really want to hear, they don't really want to hear your opinion unless you're, unless you're getting paid to give it. Um, so anyway, it's just part of the whole obesity stigma issue is you should just go out and do 50 jumping jacks and eat a plant-based diet because that's what worked for me. Well, your biology might be different than my biology, and that might not work for me at all. So I try to tell most advocates in a polite way without being that guy. Nothing works for everybody. There is no one solution for everybody, no matter what
Yes, you've got
you're
to
talking about.
attack it from every angle, pretty
Right.
much.
And the same thing holds true with type 2 in general, right? Like some people do great on GLP-1, some people need insulin, some people maybe can get away with metformin and diet and exercise. You just have to sort of see and then not judge others, or maybe even more importantly, not judge yourself if what you've
right, that right there.
Yeah. So
I find the judgment about things that people bring into their situation is so huge. And along those lines, when a minor comes in to see you and you're noticing like what kind of questions do you use to evaluate the situation in the home, and what kind of behaviors are in the home that might contribute, and then how do you intervene, or what do you tell the families, if you will?
yeah. So it's tough because I don't want to alienate families and I don't want to be perceived as judging or blaming. So
Yeah.
I actually generally, and this is personal preference and may not work for everybody, but I generally try to get that information without actually asking for it. I try to sort of talk about other things that might give me the same clues, what's around the house for when you get home from school that you might prepare for yourself or something like that. And certainly all of it is important in terms of like all weight management for children. I'm sure type 2 management for children falls right in the same way, is a family affair. So if the parents or the siblings or whomever aren't participating in the plan, then the person who needs that plan is going to have a harder time sticking to it. I do sort of harp on sugar-sweetened beverages. That one I feel I can be pretty like dogmatic about and just say, listen, you got to get the Coke out of the house. And if you, mom or dad or the siblings desperately need sugar soda, then they have to do it outside of the house when the person who can't have it isn't around to see it. And, in the early days, I got a lot more of, well, I don't want to change what I'm doing just because little Johnny needs to change what he's doing. And I'd be like, too bad. He's your kid. You got to do something, it's not, then don't come to see me. I didn't say that, but I'd be like, yeah, I can't help you if you can't help yourself, at least to some degree. And I'm not asking you to get rid of every ultra processed food in your house and replace it with farmers market produce, because that might bankrupt you. But I am asking you to make some small, tangible changes that can make a difference. So obviously, doing it for 20 years, 20 plus years at this point, you learn a lot of the sort of tricks, and I don't want to discount how important those things are, but at the same time, I want to make sure that the family understands that it's far more than diet and exercise, and that it's a disease, and that it's genetics, and that it's
absolutely
a whole thing, and that I know and they know that just diet and exercise won't fix the problem they've gotten themselves into. So I have to sort of make sure they understand how important it is to support whatever we decide to do next, whether it be medications or surgery or both, that the lifestyle changes go hand in hand with that. Um, and they'll work better if those lifestyle changes are made at the same time.
I like that. Yeah. And so speaking of epigenetics and the family history, the mother, the grandmother, um, do you think it ever goes back to earlier than the grandmother, or what research when you were looking at doing your book, like I'm specifically thinking, what did you see about epigenetics that really was like, oh yeah, that really supports what I believe to be true, that there's definitely something here because this kid has diabetes, this kid doesn't, this one's more obese than this one. What really kind of moved the lever for you and your way of thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, does it go past the grandma? Hard to know, or grandparent. Hard to know, especially because the field's only been around 20 years or so, so we don't really have
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
multiple generations to assess. It's interesting because a lot of things that have been passed down from generation to generation, we've always just assumed were cultural or social or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it really never occurred to anybody that it could be more than that, right? Like we've always talked about, let's say child abuse. If that gets passed down from generation to generation, and often, people talk about breaking the cycle and all those things. And we've just assumed that it's the behavior, like you model the behavior of your parent. And so if you were beaten as a kid, you probably have a higher likelihood of beating your own kid or whatever. But there very well could be a biological component to that
Mm-hmm.
hasn't really been well understood or even well investigated. Like when you are abused as a child, do your genes change? We know the answer to that is yes. And is it that change in genes that actually is making you more likely to abuse your own child rather than modeling the behavior of your parent? We don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, so I think sort of like I started saying earlier, which is that science evolves. I think
Mm-hmm.
the story is yet to be written in full about how
Yeah.
epigenetics.
Yeah. I remember reading some time ago the Dutch study, which looked at pregnant women who were in famine in 1946 because the Germans had them in a famine state held out. And the pregnant women existed on somewhere between, so I think it was like 500 to 800 calories, something like that. And then they did see increased rates of diabetes and obesity and fatty liver disease in the children. And then there were even things that showed up in the grandchildren. And so, like you, I was like, how do we know that's not just the fact that we're getting a more obesogenic, diabetogenic environment from 1945 to now? Because I'm
Right.
certain we are, right?
Sure.
And they did control for that in some way, but I don't remember. I remember finding the study fascinating, but I can't like teach
Well,
you and tell about it, but it
one
was
of the
really
things,
cool.
that study emphasizes, which is again something that most people might find counterintuitive, is that like small for gestational age birth weight infants
Mm,
and IUGR, intrauterine growth retardation infants are often more prone to having obesity, um,
right.
because they were basically starved, or some of them were starved as developing babies inside the mom. So it goes back to sort of the genetic and epigenetic programming. And this is relevant to the situation going on in the Middle East right now in terms of obesity, which is something I've studied and been involved with, caring for a bunch of people from over there,
Oh,
which is that
fascinating.
if you're genetically programmed to be an efficient energy storer, because as a developing fetus, you didn't get any energy, so you had to figure out a way to store every last little piece of it you could get your hands on. And then you're born into a super nutrient dense, nutrient rich, calorie available everywhere, energy available everywhere environment. Your genes are actually going to be working against you. Like your genes are going to be saying, store,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to store. So, or not that you don't want to, but that's not good for
Yeah.
your health. So lots of the folks in the Middle East have generations of Bedouins walking in the desert, living on very scarce food supply. And so and so it was a survival advantage for them to have better energy extraction and storage. And then they moved to Dubai, and that wasn't good for them anymore because, Dubai has every
Mm-hmm.
last terrible thing that the United States has ever created in terms of food. And it's everywhere, and there's no place to
Mm-hmm.
exercise, and it's hot as the dickens. So,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, it's a huge oversimplification of the problem, but it is part of what's going on in that part of the world. And it'll be interesting, actually, at some point, whether that happens in emerging regions like Africa, where food has been
Mm-hmm.
scarce for so long, if folks ever get access to abundance of food, whether they have the same sort of response that we've seen in certain other cultures.
Wow. So, being an obesity specialist for the person who is struggling with obesity, tell me, most of the time they're going through their pediatrician first. That is, and then the pediatrician is referring to you, I would imagine.
Hopefully, but they often
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. So tell me, what if I were a pediatrician, what would you want me to know? What would you want me to look for to send someone to you?
Yeah,
What advice would you give?
right. So unfortunately, the disease burden of 15 million kids can't possibly be tackled by specialists.
Mm-hmm.
So there will come a day where primary care docs, pediatricians, APPs, whomever, who are seeing children are going to have to start prescribing obesity medications the same way they prescribe asthma meds or ADHD meds, or we're never going to make any headway in dealing with 15 million kids because there aren't enough specialists to even come close.
Mm-hmm.
But today's not that day. So what I would tell a pediatrician today is, obviously they have growth charts and they can see who meets BMI criteria for referral. And actually, I was talking to a pediatrician in Texas the other day who said that his EHR, his electronic health record, now has like an alert that pops up. So if they put in the height and weight and the person exceeds the threshold for referral, they'll get an alert that says refer to one of two different places where they can refer to, which I think is really interesting,
Mm.
especially because I don't know whether the two places that they can refer to are going to have any chance of dealing with the workload that's coming their way. But the point is that there are tools you have as a pediatrician to identify kids at risk or kids who are struggling, and I would encourage them to have those conversations, even though they're difficult, with the families and the kids, and then if there's interest, refer to specialists, or if the pediatrician has expertise and wants to um, treat him or herself as a pediatrician, I encourage that too. Um, I don't think it should only be handled by specialists because I just don't think that'll ever give enough access to care for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the advice? Be aware, be compassionate, be educated, don't judge, I guess,
Yeah.
if I had to
Yeah.
sum it up in both.
Along those same lines, I remember when I was in school, we had PE. We ran and played every single day. Then there was a policy change that said that schools did not have to require physical education. And even my own daughter goes to school and does her homework during gym. And I'm like, why don't you move around and do something? She's like, I need to get my homework done. So like, how do you feel about this?
Yeah.
And what would you do if you could? Would you change it? You have a magic wand, or you are the president, you are somebody very high up who can make a change. What are you doing, if anything?
Oh, so the
Loaded question.
yeah, and luckily I'm not the president.
Mm-hmm.
But the issues are so complex and intertwined that, like,
Yep.
Yes, I think that it would be great if PE were back in all schools. I think it's important. I think it's actually good for kids just learning, especially with all the ADD that's running around these days. Just the kids go crazy for 45 minutes might actually help their ability to
Right.
pay attention. So there are many reasons why exercise should get back into schools. But again, that's by itself isn't going to make
Right.
a dent. And then, you talk about,
Well, I'm sorry, can we stop there just a second? Do you think it wouldn't make a dent, like even a small dent? Like, if it's a piece of the puzzle, would
it
it
might,
create a small dent? And then we need another like 24 other dents, but
yeah,
like,
it would
would it
make
be
the
a dent?
dent that, it would make the dent that's not covered by your lease insurance because it has to be at 3 centimeters by three. It would make a
Mm.
tiny little ding that
Mhm.
you wouldn't even necessarily notice in your car until the fourth or fifth time you walked by it and you're like, wait, was that ding there or not? Because exercise by itself, so exercise, wow. So P, an hour, let's say in best case scenario, an hour a day, 5 days a week. That'd be great.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I don't think that's ever going to happen again, but that would be significant, right? Because that's meets our daily recommendation of exercise. If you did that without changing school lunches or school breakfasts, um, and also then some schools I think have after school meals too for kids who
Hmm.
stay in aftercare. Like if you don't change that piece of the puzzle, then it's almost like why bother just changing the gym class piece? Uh, you know,
Hmm.
obviously something's better than nothing, but um, if you're gonna really gonna make an impact, you have to address both of those things.
Hmm.
And then you have the fact that yes, there are lots of kids who get a meal or two meals at school, but there are also lots of kids who don't and stop on their way home at the carryout store or come home to a home that, and again, not judging, but where dinner is something from carry out or
Hmm.
fast food or something because that's everybody's
Or
working
food
or whatever,
insecure. Hmm.
whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
So again, um, it's sort of super relevant with all the talk about SNAP these days. Like banning sugar sweetened beverages from SNAP makes intuitive sense. Like, why would you want people to use taxpayer dollars to pay for something that is known to be unhealthy?
Are
And
you,
And
and
it's
I'm
truthfully
assuming you're
going to, on
referring
a
to
long
like
enough time scale,
juices.
be a taxpayer burden. I mean, if this person is going to be on Medicare or Medicaid at some point in time, they will be paying for the those inputs whenever they went in.
right. So
Are
so
you referring to juices? I'm sorry, Dr. Nadler. Is that what you mean by
y-
sugary
well,
sweetened beverages?
soda, juice, soda,
Well, I mean, the reason I ask is I've worked at WIC before, and there's no coupons for sodas. Like it's like for this many boxes of cereal, this much milk. But juice is definitely
yeah. So
one that's questionable in there, in my opinion, but
right.
not
And I don't
sodas.
actually know. I think there are some differences between WIC and SNAP.
Yes, if you have food stamps versus
Right.
coupons,
Right.
100%.
So I
Yes,
think
yes. You can
SNAP
buy
currently
whatever.
you
Hmm.
can still buy soda with SNAP. And again, intuitively makes total sense. And it's hard to argue to say, oh no, everybody should have the right to use taxpayer dollars or whatever to put whatever they want in their body. I can understand why that gives people pause.
Hmm.
Um, but in the same vein, there was this recent bill that was released, Joni Ernst, about something that's called the Restaurant Meals Program, where for some reason,
Hmm.
I don't even understand this, California seems to have some ridiculously high number of SNAP dollars spent at fast food restaurants, like more so than like 10 times any other state in the country. Um, and her point was that it shouldn't be allowed for people to use SNAP benefits at Fast food
for
restaurants.
these ultra processed foods.
Well, at fast food restaurants. Now you can't tell people that, certainly many fast food restaurants have healthier options, and some might even have
Okay,
healthy
fair.
options. But you can't tell people what to buy when they're at a store. Or you probably could, but that's not how the
Yeah,
laws
WIC is
work.
the only one that tells people what to buy at a store, and yeah, that's the difference, because SNAP is just you regulate all of it. If
Right.
you say you can only have this, you have to then regulate it,
Right.
and that's expensive too.
Problem. Right. So again, like on the face of it, no one should have any sort of real issue with limiting where one can use their SNAP benefits. However, the point is that while some people go to those sorts of establishments because they want to, there are lots of people who go to those sorts of establishments because they have to. They just don't have access to other stuff. So to me, it's the same argument, which is if you're going to ban stuff from SNAP, you have to at the same time replace it with healthier stuff. Like,
Absolutely.
what's the point of just telling people they can't use their dollars at a certain establishment if you don't provide them a better option? And so it goes back to your sort of initial question about exercise, which is any effort towards combating diabetes, obesity, chronic disease in general that only addresses half or less of the puzzle, I can't get like super excited about, because I don't know what the cost of putting PE back in every school would be from a purely financial standpoint, but the impact it would have would probably not be sufficient to justify the cause unless you were going to do these other things at the same time, because it's like
Yeah.
one.
I remember the justifications when it came, and it had to do with children are in school to learn, which, you said part of it, if you get that energy out with attention, you need breaks during the day. You go, you run, you come back, you could potentially learn more. Like, it's very interesting, the reasons that were given that I remember. So back to you can affect policy change, and you talked some about some of the benefits and what kind of foods could be purchased. But what about food deserts, making places more walkable?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts in that? Like, if we're really taking a multi-pronged approach, what would that look like?
100%. I mean, those are the things that, like, that's to me where, maybe the government can make its biggest impact, is it can sort of address some of those issues. And in DC, where I live, there was a certain section that had 0 grocery stores for a long time. And then they got a grocery store for the first time. And I think that grocery store is still there, but I'm not sure, because it struggles to make ends meet, because the culture didn't really necessarily include going to grocery stores. There had been such a culture of carryouts forever that it was hard to change their habits. Which is a whole nother thing. Like, just, you can provide access, but how do you convince people to use that access? Especially when they're not used to it. So I think it would be great if there were more green spaces and more walkable spaces, and people didn't drive as much as they do, and people had access to healthy food, and all of the, it sort of sound like a Debbie Downer a little bit, but we've just gotten so far adrift of where we once were that it's almost hard now to think about, like, okay, how could actually, if I had the magic wand, how could I actually make it happen? Like, how would I actually do it?
There have definitely been things that have worked and have proven to work. It's just, it's, I agree. We are so far, I'm talking like 20 years removed from a lot of those things. And some of them were more recent, but for the most part.
Well, let's take a different tack. So we've established that we live in an obesogenic environment, right? We can't point to this person created it or anything like that. Just there's a lot of inputs, but here we are.
Yeah.
This generation is struggling with things that the previous generation didn't, and that the previous generation didn't. So we can see a trend. We can see it's getting worse. as much as you and I would love to create policy at the national global level, whatever that is, probably not realistic, at least not this week.
Definitely not this week.
What would, I remember the biodome experiment back in the 80s or 90s or whatever it is, where they just created this little island and turned out that it didn't work because they didn't account for the concrete soaking up the oxygen. But anyway, if I could create a non-obesogenic biodome, and we're just going to call this my house, right? And I have an awareness that every time I leave the biodome, I'm going into hostile territory. The food available to me, the choices available to me, the marketing that's directed towards me, all of these things are hostile to my body. So effectively, I'm creating a little isolated, safe zone that as long as you're inside the walls, I can control that. What does that look like?
Well, I guess it looks like where the beverages that are in the house are basically water or sparkling water. There are no artificial sweeteners and there's no sugar-sweetened beverages. The foods are mostly, I guess, either minimally processed or unprocessed, depending on, so obviously it can't be unprocessed because if you have an unprocessed animal that you just hunted, that would not be something you could eat. So you do have to process things.
Canned foods are processed.
Yes.
Yeah, processing in and of itself isn't bad. It's that ultra processing,
Right.
things that you wouldn't normally find in your kitchen. Mm-hmm.
Right. I mostly learned that from the TV show Naked and Afraid, where they would go shoot an animal and then someone would say, oh, let me process that. And I'd be like, oh, I guess everything gets processed. There is no unprocessed food out there.
Great point.
If you truly wanted to make it completely without any possible downside to your body, there would be a whole bunch of other things like, there wouldn't be alcohol, there wouldn't be probably screens or television or, you probably wouldn't find that many people who want to stay in that biodome very long.
Yeah. Right. I don't think you'd have a lot of chairs.
For parents who have a child that is struggling. I mean, genetically is going to struggle regardless of what you do. Yeah. And for that parent that often feels like just helpless, like they can't do anything. No. What moves the needle outside of surgery and maybe this isn't our generation might be the one that has to turn this around and start moving it the other way and just normalizing these safe behaviors. Yeah. So I think the point, obviously I'm being somewhat facetious, but the point is that so you mentioned kids who are struggling. I would actually try to make it even earlier than that. So before your kid's struggling, like if you know you have a risk, if you know you have a genetic risk, or if you know you have a genetic risk, or you've struggled with weight yourself as a parent, I would be trying my best to provide, as healthy an environment at home within reason that I could. And I would certainly start with sugar-sweetened beverages. That's the easiest. Obviously, all those other chips and things are really not good for you. Actually, one of my kids' friends just started a snack company. Well, not even a snack company, but has a snack product where somehow he aerates the rinds of Parmesan cheese into like a crunchy, basically protein bomb, like 15 grams of protein with no carbs.
Ingenuity. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm hawking. I'm giving him a free plug. I haven't tried them yet, so I can't tell you if they're any good.
Still, I'm impressed.
Yeah, but the macros are good.
He's in college, and this was like just a side project that has morphed into its own. But the point is that there are snacks that can replace the typical, Cheetos, Doritos, potato chip type stuff that we all sort of used to think were okay on occasion, and now they're sort of almost never okay. Especially if you have a high risk. I think that the reality for parents or even wannabe parents is to get their own house in order first, not necessarily physical structure house, but their metabolic health house, their own biodome, let's say, their internal biodome.
Yeah.
So you're saying even if you don't have kids, this episode is very helpful for people to listen to. especially if they're already listening to the diabetes podcast for some reason.
I would tell your audience that, especially before they have kids, they probably have the highest chance of making a difference in the next generation than anybody else. Because if they get themselves in the best metabolic shape they can before they have kids, and then also have started to think about their own behaviors that their kid might model once if they have a kid, then that child is going to be born into a healthier physical environment, will be developing in a healthier maternal physical environment in utero, and maybe even some of the genetic or maybe some of the epigenetic. We don't know as much about reversing epigenetic changes as we need to, but it is thought to some degree that exercise or healthier eating and avoidance of some of the ultra processed foods can reverse some of the epigenetic changes. So that's what I would tell your listeners or anybody else, is that, again, I don't want to sound like a nihilist, but the kids who are already born are less, they're already sort of behind the eight ball because their parents may not have done anything to help them out before they were born.
Right.
So the folks that are out there that could do something about their own health. And again, it's like the worst group of people, because most people between 20 and 30 or 35 don't even see a doctor. They don't even have a primary care doc. They don't even care. And then maybe they start to care if they're thinking about having a kid, but that is often just the mom and not necessarily the dad, but the dads have to get out there and do it too. So we got a long way to go. But it's not that it can't be done. It just needs to be, there needs to be a little bit more emphasis. And I don't want to sound like the jealous little brother that I am, but we spend all this attention on adult obesity and adult chronic disease management. We barely talk about kids.
That's so true.
And that's probably in part because there's a lot more money to be made in adult medicine than there is in pediatric medicine. But I just wish we were talking about kids more, because then we would still be talking about like maternal fetal medicine and moms. And it really, to me, is the only way we're ever going to make a big enough dent in the epidemic where we can actually see it from across the room or across the parking lot or whatever. Because we need to stop the intergenerational transmission of obesity risk. And we're only going to do that with educating young adults or even teenagers, so that when they get to be young adults, they know what to expect.
Any idea of how that might possibly happen? And even in your, as a
The whole world has to
dietitian,
subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just
awesome.
Well, there you go.
Look at that. Hello.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel. The whole problem will be fixed.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
And we will definitely have the link to your YouTube channel in the show
I know.
notes.
I feel like I have so many more, like every question, everything we brought up, like I want to go back to the pediatrician, and I have so many things, but I know you have a time constraint. So we might just have to do this again and come back. And
the good news or the bad news, depending on how you look at it, this particular disease and disease problem and disease process isn't going anywhere in the next 5 to 10 years. So, if we do a second episode 6 months from now or a year from now or 5 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, it might look a little bit better, but certainly not going to be better in the short term. So,
well, I think you also mentioned that you're working on your book. So maybe that's a good opportunity for
let's try to end on a little bit of a high note. Tell us what inspired you to write your book and do your YouTube channel, because there's some hope in there somewhere.
Truly, like I said, I sound like a total Debbie Downer, and
I think it's important to understand. I mean, this is an epidemic that we're discussing, and it's not a happy epidemic. Right. You see something that a lot of people don't, and it's important for people to understand that this is epidemic proportions. We're not talking about one-off, 1 in a million, 1 in 15,000. These are our kids too. Right. So it's important.
I think that's where the hope lies, right? Is that it'd be one thing if we'd done everything we could for the for children, and it wasn't working. But the reality is we haven't done very much at all.
Hardly anything.
Right. So we haven't really tried much of anything. And so there is great opportunity to change our behavior as a society. And if we do that, we will likely have future generations of kids who are much healthier than our current generation. And, I'm sure you've heard the statistics about like this generation of children is the first one that's not predicted to outlive their parents' generation. And there's all these signs that we are definitely heading in the wrong direction. So my book is really, frankly, it's just and my YouTube channel and all this other stuff that I'm doing right currently is just to try to educate people and let them know what no one has told them before, or if what they have heard before is actually accurate or not. I'm trying to be everything very evidence-based and very scientific and not just my opinion. And a whole nother subject for another day is why people with opinions but no medical background seem to be driving
rampant
healthcare policy or healthcare initiatives or anything.
Preaching to the choir.
Here's a preview. It's the money. Follow the money trail and you will find out why.
Yes, but it's unlikely that will be successvel. So at some point, the pendulum is going to swing the other direction where evidence comes back, and evidence makes a comeback. Sounds like a good title for something.
Do you have your book title yet?
So right now, the book title is tentatively called "The Skinny on Childhood Obesity." Little play on
that's good.
There.
That's good.
But I guess the way it works is that I'll have no say in the actual title because the publishers, if I get a publisher, they'll take it and they'll come up with a bunch of titles and go through hopefully focus groups or pilots or somebody, and then it'll come up with a name that I'll, hopefully get some say into, but may or may not. But
after you're famous and on Oprah, will you come back and still have a podcast interview with us?
For sure, but I don't know. So Oprah just released a book. I don't know if you know that, but I
did not.
She co-wrote a book with actually a well-respected obesity physician and researcher out of Yale, and it's coming out in January. So now I'm pitching somebody else's product again.
Yeah, Oprah gets a plug too.
My kids' friends. Snack company.
Parmesan rinds and
pitching adult obesity treatment books. So it probably won't be on Oprah, or maybe it will be. So I'm clearly happy to come back anytime and talk more about it. And hopefully
we would love to have
conversation gets started if you say it enough times. If I keep banging my head against the wall, maybe at some point the wall begins to crack a little bit, and not my forehead.
Not your skull. Yeah. That is the hope.
And that is the hope. People on your episode can't see it, but my forehead is quite prominent and obvious. So I don't really want to put scars up there.
No.
But I know it sounds like it's sort of dismal out there, which it kind of is in a way, but just because kids don't have access to care and aren't getting the care they need. And right now, the pediatricians aren't ready to provide that care, nor do they understand necessarily the critical nature of that care. But I do think times are changing, and I do think, especially young adults out there, I think the opportunity is now to make a big difference. And so I'm shooting my shot, as they say, and hopefully somebody will listen. And
I love that.
If not,
that's right.
Scrapping my way until I give up, which will probably be never, because I'm from New Jersey and I don't give up. So
love it. Love it. Dr. Nadler, thank you so very much. We really enjoyed having you on the Diabetes Podcast, and when we will have you back, if we have to go to DC and stick a mic in your face, we'll have you back.
I don't think they'll take all that, but yeah, no, obviously love to come back and talk anytime. And for your listeners, you guys will have the links, but it's www.obesityexplained.com is my website, and my YouTube channel is @obesityexplained. And Instagram is the same thing.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Nice chatting, and we'll chat again soon.
Excellent.
Thank
you, Dr. Nadler.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Diabetes Podcast, and a huge thank you to Dr. Evan Nadler for reframing childhood obesity as a complex, treatable disease, and for sharing practical steps families and clinicians can take now. If you want to go deeper, check out his website at obesityexplained.com. You can also find him on YouTube and Instagram, both at Obesity Explained. We hope this episode helped you, and if you know someone struggling with pediatric obesity, please share this with them. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to give it a like and leave a review. This really helps to promote and sustain this free podcast and get the word out to millions of people worldwide that are struggling with type 2 and prediabetes, letting them know that remission is possible if you take action today. And if you have additional questions or need additional support, reach out to us at support@empowereddiabetes.com. Until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.